So in this video we're going to have a look at features of a science. We're going to have a look at all these different key terminologies, and what you can see on the screen there is what your spec says. So there's quite a lot of key terminology they're expecting you to know. So things like objectivity, the empirical method, replicability, falsifiability, theory construction, hypothesis testing, paradigms and paradigm shifts. So because all these are named, they can ask you very specific questions about each of these different aspects of a science. So the very first thing is objectivity. So if something's objective, it means it's not affected by any personal feelings and experiences of the researcher. The opposite of objectivity is subjectivity. So that's where it's up to that person's interpretation. So the main thing that we can think of as being objective would be lab experiments, because of them being highly controlled. Things like content analysis, particularly thematic analysis, is very much up to the interpretations of the researcher themselves. You can also have a think about observations. So some observations can be seen as being objective, whereas others are a bit more subjective depending on the methods that you use. Now, if we're wanting objectivity, the researcher needs to make sure that they remain value free and unbiased. So they shouldn't be trying to put their own views, or whoever they're doing the research on behalf of views, in front of the actual research itself, which some people can find quite tricky. In terms of the empirical method, it's basically the scientific method, which quite a lot of people refer to. So this is the idea that we should remain objective. It should be objective methods that we're using if we're going to class ourselves as a science. We should be using quantitative methods because this allows us to do lots of detailed analysis of our data. And it should be systematically controlled. So our extraneous variables shouldn't be going all over the place. Everything should be controlled as much as possible, and it should be replicable. We should be using standardized procedures so that if someone wanted to look at our research, maybe change our research, check our research, adapt it, then they can do that. Whether that's the researcher themselves and actually repeat their own research, or if there is someone else, they should be able to repeat the research, but importantly, they should be able to get the same results as well. And if we have all this, we should be able to test and maybe refine a theory and use these methods over and over again to try and get the best information that we can about human behaviour. In terms of replicability, it's like what I said, we should be able to get exactly the same results if we repeat exactly the same experiment, whether that's the same researcher or whether that is a different researcher. So that's why we need to make sure we've got standardized procedures. We need to make sure that when we are writing our variables, when we're writing how we're controlling our extraneous variables, we should be writing these in an operationalized way. So for example, not just saying energy drink, we should be saying how much of that energy drink, what brand of energy drink that person will be taking. Falsifiability is an interesting one. So we should only be testing theories where it is possible to say whether this is false. So we should be able to get almost a yes/no answer to this question. This causes some issues if we're looking at stuff like Freud's theory in the psychodynamic approach. So Freud isn't able to be proven wrong. In fact, whenever someone said, I think you're wrong, he might just say, you're in denial about what you've been through. So if we're trying to be scientific, whatever we're trying to say, we should be able to prove it false. And that makes it scientific. So that's the idea of falsifiability. Some areas of psychology you are able to prove it wrong, whereas others, like your psychodynamic, it's very, very hard to do so. The next aspect of features of a science is the idea of theory construction. And you might have done this lower down in school. You might have had a look at the scientific methods and how that happens. So first off, a theory is a set of principles that explain a behaviour or an event. And in order to construct a theory, if we're using the scientific method, we should have evidence present first. Everything should be evidence-based, and a lot of areas of psychology are now becoming evidence-based practice. So you'll use inductive processes. So what you can see on the screen there isn't the inductive process. So you might observe something, think something's quite interesting. So you then devise an experiment to test the thing that you have observed. Then from your experiment, you should be able to start seeing patterns and trends, and from that you'll then construct a theory. You can then start making hypotheses about other behaviours or similar behaviours but in a different scenario, and then start going through this again and start devising experiments to help you to refine your theory. And through this you're going to use hypothesis testing. And when we're doing a hypothesis, it should be objective, it should be measurable, so that it's really clear as to whether the results support or refute the hypothesis. And that's why we spend a lot of time in psychology looking at hypothesis construction. Now, if the findings support the hypothesis, then that strengthens our theory. However, if we refute it, then we need to change our theory accordingly. And this is how we should be changing and adapting all the things within psychology. Another feature of a science is that you would have a paradigm, and a paradigm is a shared set of assumptions or methods. So biology, they have a shared set of assumptions. At the moment, a lot of it's based on evolution, so that is their paradigm. Chemistry has their paradigm. In psychology, we might be seen as a pre-science, because we don't really have a paradigm as such. There's too much disagreement between the approaches. If you think about it, a lot of our approaches argue with each other about the origins of behaviour, about how we should be studying behaviour. So in actual fact, a lot of people see psychology as being a pre-science and not a science until we actually have the shared set of assumptions between all of us. Finally, paradigm shifts. So this is how a discipline moves on. So this is called a scientific revolution. And this is where you have a small amount of scientists who see things slightly differently. So they challenge the accepted paradigm. And over time, this paradigm starts becoming popular and then eventually becomes the accepted paradigm. So in the early stages of psychology, psychoanalytic theory was very much the in thing. Lots of stuff based on Freud, looking into the unconscious mind. But then a small amount of people such as Watson, Skinner, started looking at things and saying that we should start being objective and start using scientific methods in order to look at behaviour and look at things that are observable. So they started challenging this idea, and then eventually behaviourism kind of took over as the main area of psychology and the main way of thinking at that time. So that could be seen as a paradigm shift. Another one in biology, for example, is when Darwin's theory of natural selection came out, and that completely changed the way that biologists thought about how the world worked. So all these different areas are all about the features of a science, and you can see there's lots of little bits that can kind of explain it. And you should be able to take all these bits and be able to determine whether a study or an area of psychology can be seen as scientific. And you have to start thinking, right, is it objective? Does it use an empirical method? Is it replicable? Does it show falsifiability? Does it use theory construction? And does it have a set of paradigms within them? So hopefully you found that useful, and that's everything that you need to know about the features